That's new. It says the meeting is being live streamed. You want to get out?
Live.
I think I have to go touch the screen. Just a minute. Mike isn't here.
No, I don't think you need to do anything.
I don't?
No, we're live.
There. There was a sign on the screen that made it difficult to see everyone, so I
Oh.
just touched it.
Okay.
All right, thank you, and good morning. This is the Joint Legislative Child Protection Oversight Committee. We are meeting hybrid, so which means that I am here in the State House, and I'm expecting Representative Jessup to be here with me. Otherwise, she'll join others on Zoom. So the rest of the committee is on Zoom, and our witnesses are all here on Zoom. Before we start, just because we're hybrid, it makes it difficult, as you know, to see everyone. If you would like to say something, committee members, just raise your hand, or if you think that there's a pause, just speak up so that you can ask questions or make comments as we go along. And other than that, please mute yourself when you're not speaking. And here comes Representative Jessup. So we've got at least two people.
Good morning.
Here, good morning.
My apologies.
No apologies necessary. We started the meeting and we're hybrid. So welcome. So this morning, today, we have a long day in front of us, and Deputy Commissioner Radke, you've got a long day in front of you. But thank you for putting together the information that you're going to bring to us. And one of the things that Representative Pugh had asked us to look at and thought would be helpful was the Family First legislation and plan. So Representative Pugh, did you want to add, make any comments before we turn it over to our witnesses?
Thank you very much, Senator Lyons. I really appreciate the Deputy Commissioner and others coming. I think what is most important for us is knowing where the state is going forward. While this particular grouping of individuals, of legislators, may not at the same time have heard presentations about what is Family First, I think we've all gotten that information. So really what we need to know is going forward, how in fact is the state going to respond? What are the challenges that this is presenting to us? And perhaps, although this may be a week or two too early, but what kind of legislative initiatives or will be looked at in January? So that's sort of what my thought is.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
No, go right ahead, Deputy Commissioner. I think Representative Pugh has provided a perfect introduction. So go right ahead.
I was going to say thank you for that level setting, and that makes a lot of sense, and we're really excited to give the committee this presentation today. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and get the PowerPoint up and ready.
We have this on our committee webpage. So if anyone wants to open that up and follow along, in addition to looking at the screen, you can do that.
I just want to make sure, does everybody see our cover page that says Family First Prevention Services Act, current
We do.
status?
We do. We also see your script, the information that you'll be reading from. I didn't know whether you wanted that up or not.
See here if I can change that around a bit. Is that better?
Perfect.
Great. Okay, so let's get started. Good morning, everyone. For the record, my name is Erica Radke, and I'm the Deputy Commissioner of the Family Services Division of DCF. The committee has asked us to discuss the Family First Prevention Services Act, also known as FFPSA. FFPSA is a major piece of legislation from the federal government that has the potential to completely transform child welfare as we know it by using federal funds through Title IV-E drawdown as a lever to encourage states to shift to a policy practice model that prioritizes keeping children in the home and bringing supports and services inside the home to help the family stabilize. And also Family First ensures or is very interested in reducing the reliance on residential care in favor of community-based supports when possible. We believe the intent of FFPSA aligns really well with FSD's family-centered approach regarding the care for the children in our custody. And our division has been working really hard to achieve the goal of having FFPSA, having our plan in place by the deadline of October 1st. So what I'd like to do now is turn things over to Beth Sawsville, our FFPSA lead, who's been instrumental in really bringing this, the work of getting this act together forward and making so much great progress. And also Eli Hawgood, who is the FFPSA grant manager. And I'd like them to go ahead and to start discussing the details of the status of where we are so far with our plan.
So good morning. I'd love to. Thank you, Deputy Radke. My name is Beth Sawsville. I know some of you, so I appreciate so much the opportunity to come and talk about Family First Prevention Services Act. Next slide, please. So this slide is just a review. I know some of you have seen this before, but a couple of highlights to kind of level set our conversation today. The important piece is that Family First Prevention Services Act is really about prevention. This represents a fundamental shift of dollars to build off-ramps from custody tracks, expanding services while preserving core child welfare functions and enhancing the effectiveness of our practice model. Evidence-based programs and services incorporate results-based accountability, and they sit on the prevention clearinghouse, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. Quality residential care is based now on clinical need and a trauma-informed model of care with a strong family component. So that is also very important to us. System alignment and integration, that includes an effective use of state dollars by maximizing federal match across departments, integration of substitute care dollars across departments per our public consulting group recommendations of single point of entry. Next slide, please. I thought it would be important, and I realize on the screen the print is so small, but I'm hoping that some of you saw this ahead of time. We thought that the timeline for FFPSA was an important one to share because this timeline was actually created back in April around the time that my position was created and I came on board. And I have to say that I feel so blessed with support from our central office and our department for this position. It has truly been a blessing. But we are on target, as Deputy Commissioner Radke shared with you, for a timely October 1st submission of our plan. The green boxes indicate what has been completed since that time, and the yellow what is currently in process. As you can see, lots of us have been hard at work since this timeline was developed. Next slide, please. So what has happened recently? These are two key pieces of the work of FFPSA that I thought important to share with you. This is driven both the candidacy definition and the choice of evidence-based programs is driven out of the work of our prevention work group, which is 80 plus strong with internal and external members. Candidacy refers to those who are at risk of coming into care, and evidence-based programs are chosen from the Prevention Clearinghouse. We are focusing on evidence-based programs that are well supported or promising to start with, and housed within family services for year one, as they can be delivered as soon as the contracts are in place and funding for prevention planning is approved. Our hope for subsequent years is that we'll be able to partner with other departments and divisions to further support evidence-based programs that they already have in place, thus combining and maximizing efforts and resources for children and families. We also recognize that promising work has been happening in Vermont through programming not recognized by the clearinghouse, and we can add those as part of our vision to be explored should they become supported or should we choose to invest in an independent systematic review process for consideration as an evidence-based practice by the clearinghouse. Next slide, please. So this is our finalized candidacy definition, and folks in the work group and then our core team have put in a lot of time and effort, and we decided to intentionally keep our definition broad, which allows us a lot of flexibility in the years ahead to expand and provide services to a variety of the populations that touch pieces of our system. If you look at this screen and think of the dark blue, and I've gotten into the habit of calling them buckets. So the dark blue squares or triangles are the components of the candidacy definition. The light blue squares and triangles are examples of those. So what you, if you look at this, what I would encourage you to do is to think with me about our vision. The vision would be that the DCF involved buckets would shrink over time and the community pathways bucket would expand without compromising child safety, which is at the forefront of our focus. Next slide, please. Vermont's prevention plan and process. So this is meant to illustrate that all of the work currently being done informs the prevention plan on target for the 10-1 submission. Some of the highlights of that is that there's an intentional focus to start out small with just a few evidence-based programs and qualified residential treatment programs or exception programs to start to be able to better measure success. In terms of QA, there's a solid commitment from DCF to roll this out successfully, despite our challenges with our data collection systems. And this can be demonstrated by the support to implement the first module of a CWIS system. This will alleviate the need for labor-intensive data collections through less effective means, such as our current databases SSMIS in particular, which is very outdated, as you all know, and the collection of data through Excel spreadsheets, which takes a tremendous amount of people time. But we will need additional ongoing financial support for subsequent modules. DCF recognizes the need for better data to be able to demonstrate impact and its importance among many audiences. This will help us to achieve that. Moving forward with assessing our current residential treatment programs for qualified residential treatment program readiness, the good news is a few programs will be close to meeting those standards on or around the October 1st start date. And for the two heavier lift pieces of the QRTP process, which are accreditation and aftercare, other states are also struggling, and there's further consideration by the Children's Bureau about what might be acceptable. And we're exploring how to be flexible and yet within the parameters of providing best practice. Additionally, there are certain populations where service provision in residential care is supported by Title IV funding outside of the scope of a QRTP. Those include children or youth who have been sex trafficked or at risk of being sex trafficked, pregnant parenting youth in DCF care, and youth over 18 for independent living skill development. So those are carve-outs that programs could choose to choose a treatment model to engage in practice to serve that population. It is important to note that there's been special consideration made to make sure that the components of our plan align with the Public Consulting Group report. And that report was a request of AHS and we contracted with the Public Consulting Group to analyze children's residential system of care. Next slide, please. So system alignment at a closer glance. This is important because it really illustrates where our Representative Pugh, you had mentioned kind of where we're going as part of that. And this slide really illustrates that. The work of the work groups, as you see in that column, informs the interagency team. What I will tell you is that I have spoken with folks from the Department of Mental Health and the Department of Disability and Aging, and I presented to the state interagency team yesterday and asked them to partner with us around this plan because there is a lot of different departments and divisions and agencies, the Agency of Education, represented at that table, along with parental voice. So the hope would be that they would serve as that interagency review and help us right now in the short term with the visioning and long term with oversight and QA for the plan going forward. That team then would inform to the core team, and then the core team would obviously provide their thoughts and oversight of the plan and provide that to DCF and AHF leadership for final approval. Going forward, the hope would be that the funding could follow the needs of the child, youth, and family to be able to access services without coming to the attention of child welfare. Next slide, please.
Can I ask a question, Beth?
Absolutely.
Yes, please do. This is probably a good place to stop, and Senator Sears, go right ahead with your question, and then we'll see if anyone else has a question.
Beth, welcome. Sure. Good to see you.
Thank you.
You skipped a couple of pages that I had questions about, and this is the child in need of residential treatment assessment, excuse me, and a 60-day judicial review. And my questions are, number one, has this been gone over with the courts? Are they able to handle a 60-day review, given that, there's been so much delay within the court system due to COVID and other factors? They are backed up tremendously. The second question is, will that impact out-of-state residential placements will they have to go through this review? And will those placements have to follow the same rules as Vermont placement, residential placements?
Yep. Those are great questions, Senator. And I apologize. I did skip over those intentionally because those are the slides that Eli Hoggood is going to go over with you all. That's kind of been her wheelhouse.
Right. Well, there you go. Thank you. I'll look forward to hearing the answer to those questions at a later time.
Sure. We'll get back to those for sure.
So before we go ahead, does anyone, I do have a question, but does anyone else have a question?
I do.
Okay, who was that?
Sorry, that
Oh,
was.
go ahead, Representative Pugh, go right ahead.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I was struck by the interagency team that you were referencing right before we stopped. And what I understood you to say before we stopped is this was going to be sort of, for lack of a better term, the broad oversight group where the plan is going to be brought. I'm trying to understand what the function of this review team is that you said had parent voice as well. So I'm curious about how that's being put in.
Yes, thank you. So the interagency team review would sit, the work groups would feed their suggestions to the interagency review team that would then provide those, that level of oversight and suggestions to the core team. That really sits in the middle there for right now as a way to make sure that there is a smaller yet very skilled set of participants from many of the facets of the community that we touch in our work, and that we have the very best of thoughts and suggestions to be able to bring to the core team to take forward in our planning. And the hope, Representative, would be that down the road, I think it's very possible that as we break down some of those silos, and I'm not crazy about that term, but I understand what it means, and that as those get broken down and the funding streams can follow the child, youth, or family, that they very well could then be absorbed into that core team. So that becomes one with final kind of suggestions being elevated up to, to leadership level.
Okay, I have two sort of specific questions.
Okay.
One is where is the voice of people who are actually impacted?
Yes.
Parents, youth, foster parents, number one.
Yep.
Number two, what is your vision of the role of the legislature? I don't see this anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for asking. So we have been very intentional in making sure that we figure out pathways to hear the voice of those with lived experience. So that, spans the populations that we serve. We have done that in gathering feedback for it to feed into our candidacy definition. And we will be doing that in a couple of ways I envision going forward. One of that is through the interagency team, which has members of the Federation for Families and other entities such as that. And in addition to that, we're working right now on a communications plan, which you saw in that, a prior slide. And the purpose of a communications plan is exactly what you're talking about, to make sure that there is a better feedback loop ongoing, going
So
forward.
what is, I appreciate you mentioning Federation for Families, which I believe is a group whose focus is more specifically on families who have a child with a mental illness. And we are the Department of Children and Families. You are, the part of this has to do with children at risk of being removed from home because of because of multiple factors. And having a mental illness does not equate necessarily at all. And so I am struck by, you have not been able to identify any group that focuses on kids in care, kids in custody, or those.
Yeah, I certainly understand what you're saying. We do have parent representation at the federal level consulting with us around just that. Her job is to really help us to figure out how to engage particularly families with lived experience, because we know that that has been challenging at best. We do have a quality assurance program, a review process that does include family voice, and that will be utilized in the Family First prevention plan going forward as one avenue of that. And that's all parents of children in custody. But as we upstream this process and look at providing prevention services, we also want to make sure that even families that have a light touch by us or no touch by us, that we're getting their opinions about what works as well. So I think that, although that interagency team might not have a parent sitting on it currently, there is strong family voice, and that team really is for the purpose of the breaking down of the silos going forward, making sure that, between, your primary, Act 264 players, DCF, the Department of Mental Health, Agency of Education, that we are with others collectively looking at the way that we serve our kids and families and making sure that we can provide services no matter who they are coming into contact with.
Also, Beth, I would like to add, you did mention that work group that was 80 persons strong. And I do believe that there's certain agencies within that work group that are deeply involved in child welfare issues as well. So that is a way at least to get that family voice from those agencies that are working directly with those families.
Yes, and they have done outreach for us. Thank you, Deputy Commissioner.
Yeah.
Thank you. This is helpful.
Do you have another question?
I was just, what do they see the role of the legislature?
Oh, yes, that. And my question is going to go back to what you were just talking about. So why don't you go ahead with your question about the legislature, and then I'll move on with my question.
Well, I'll start, Beth. I do remember the last time we testified, and at the end of the committee meeting, you mentioned that it was mentioned that FFPSA would be the next topic. I do recall that I talked about that large work group and invited members of the legislature to join that group, because that one is a very vibrant group. So I do see that a role for the legislature working in that capacity. And I'm sure Beth has other ideas as well.
I think that is true. I think that, I think that I mentioned that to this group the last time I testified too, that there's absolutely ongoing opportunity. That prevention work group will have the opportunity, and this was presented to them from the very beginning, that we have been meeting every other week since the inception of really kind of putting all hands on deck to get our plan put together. And they have been such a committed group. But we also talked to them initially about the need for ongoing kind of oversight and feedback, that yes, it's a rather intense time now, but there will be ongoing need for the great experience and wide variety of input from that group going forward. So that is a way, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, Deputy Commissioner.
So Representative Pugh, do you have another question?
Thank you. I do not. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, I'm glad that you brought up the information that you were just talking about. One of the things that you said, because I'll ask my second question first, but one of the things that you talked about was that we will probably need to have additional funding to carry out the work that's ongoing, or at least the implementation of the plan. That I wasn't clear on that. But it would seem to me, is there any role then within any additional appropriation or current appropriations for the legislature, Joint Fiscal Committee or others, thinking that any additional appropriation would have to be balanced on what policies are being supported? So can you just talk a little bit about that, your comment, Beth, that more funding or additional funding might be necessary?
I'm going to let Deputy Commissioner Radke chime in at this point.
We are looking for additional funding in terms of, we mentioned CWIS as to enhance our data approach, but our commissioner does have some plans in place in order to try to fund that effort. And at this point, we're just moving forward and being hopeful that when we do have a request for funds, that it will be acceptable.
So is the funding source going to be a grant funded source from at the federal level? Or is this something that will take us into the budget, the state?
The commissioner is working out those details, but I do believe it'll probably be a combination.
Okay, all right. I see that really does inject the legislature into that process. At what time, when do you think that you'll have an understanding of how much funding is needed and for which aspects of the plan? Do you have any idea of that?
At this point, there's so many moving parts, and we're still talking to the commissioner in terms of approvals, so I can't say.
Okay, thank you. Well, that'll be important for us to keep an eye on for a lot of reasons, not the least of which I think also Senator Sears brought up regarding the judiciary and how that all plays out with their responsibilities, any needs there. My other question really relates to the focus that you have on a prevention plan, and you're gathering data on what works for treatment, evidence-based practices, but I guess I'm trying to sort out how we're going to get to a comprehensive prevention plan with a more of a focus on treatment. And have you considered working with the Chief Prevention Officer as well as the Prevention Council, which is a pretty integrated group of folks, of interagency folks? So let me ask that first, and then I have another question after that.
I actually had not thus far, but am happy to involve anyone and everyone in this project. We have been received a lot of guidance and oversight from the Center for States, as federal support around the creation and delivery of this plan, as well as Casey Family Programs. and evident change. So, along with many folks within the state, of course. And so, but having said that, it is a humongous undertaking. And so, we've been truly open to any feedback that folks might have for us around the creation and implementation of our prevention plan.
It just seems that the focus on prevention would be key here. So identifying those practices that work in prevention, as well as those practices that work in treatment for families and kids.
Yep.
Just a comment, but then the other question I have is part of our committee's charge is health, so health and welfare. And are there members of the primary care or pediatric community working with you on this planning process within that group of 80 stakeholders or within the smaller oversight group?
Yeah, so the larger group does incorporate members of the Vermont Department of Health, because we do recognize that we want to provide treatment that has a public health lens to it, for sure. And we have, to go back to your former question, the prevention plan really has to do with, we are limited by the statute, by the federal statute around where those programs can be selected from. So we have tried to do a combination of programs that are currently being delivered that we might be able to expand upon, and looking at programs that we might be able to actually afford to deliver within the state. So, but they have to come off the prevention clearinghouse, which has been a little bit of a challenge for us. In terms of the treatment lens, we are working closely both in our residential process as well as in our prevention process with our relatively newly appointed clinical director for the department, and to help to inform that. Plus, we have other clinicians involved in some of our work group work as well, to make sure that it aligns with best practice.
Okay, thank you. So we'll look forward to how this plays out, I think, going forward. Any other questions at this point, committee? Okay, Beth.
I do have a follow-up question.
Go ahead, Senator Hsu.
Yeah, I remember my first presentation on this came in a Senate Appropriations Committee meeting. And at the time, I remember being concerned. You don't have to answer this now, but before the end of the presentation, I would love to have a general discussion of this. I wondered whether we should even accept this money. The whole families, this whole system of Families First is based, in my opinion, on large states where there are huge populations. For example, the requirement that a residential program have a nurse on board defies logic when we have small residential programs in Vermont, where, maybe 8 kids. How would you possibly get a nurse on board? There were a lot of requirements there, and I don't know. I still think the general question that I have is, should we even participate? For years, we have been trying to put families first in Vermont. This is nothing new for us. Our efforts at kinship care and all the things that, Beth, you've been doing for a long time, at least in Bennington, and doing a great job at it, I might add. I can remember sitting with you and talking about certain families and certain kids. And we go down the list of all the family members and you can't find one who's appropriate. We've done this. We're doing this. And it really bothers me that there's some federal requirements here that are going to be onerous for our system of care. for the people who are providing that care. So that's
Right.
just a general comment. It's not a criticism of DCF or anyone in DCF. It's a criticism of the federal government for trying to make one size fits all. And that was the discussion in Senator Probst. So I just want to keep that as a general part of this conversation.
So,
Yeah,
go ahead, Beth, sorry.
I'll just make a quick comment, because I know you folks have a packed schedule today. I couldn't agree with you more, Senator. However, what I would encourage you to think about, and I'm happy to have further conversation because I could talk family first all day. What I have latched onto with Family First and what I have come to understand from the legislation is that we have more flexibility than we originally thought. So I have really messaged out from all of the different elements of the legislation that it really encompasses best practice first and federal funding second. So it will allow federal funding for, as you know, for prevention services, which has never been the case in the past. But as for our residential programs, Senator, we did do a readiness assessment with them so that we could take a look at what they would need. And the bottom line is that the language in the legislation is very flexible in those different requirements to become QRTP, with the exception maybe of the accreditation, which I'm also working with the Children's Bureau to allow some flexibility for us around that as well. So I think that first and foremost, what I have found is that it's not a bad thing to ask all of our residential treatment programs to carry forth a trauma-informed model of care, right? And not all of them can talk through what that means. So that's where a little oversight would be really helpful. In terms of the nursing and clinical staff, what we have come to learn is that they don't have to sit on site and they don't have to be employees of the programs. They just have to have a protocol and a plan to access them as needed. So many of them, I'll tell you that those in the family engagement, when we did the assessment of our 25 or so programs, all of them felt pretty solid in those areas. So hopefully that helps, a little bit to clarify some of that.
No, it helps me a lot. Thank you.
Absolutely.
terrific.
Anytime.
I guess as the questions arise, there may be other places where it appears the federal government has made rules that are difficult for us to comply with. And it sounds like you have the details, Beth, so keep us informed.
Absolutely. Anytime. And I really appreciate the opportunity to come in and talk with you all today.
Okay, well, why don't you go ahead? Because as you said, we do have a compressed schedule.
So this was just, I was actually done. That was my final slide. This was just for your all, and we were moving to questions. So you just got ahead of me a little bit.
Okay, so we have the acronym buster. Questions committee.
And then
In terms of the timeline, and you've heard the questions specifically about a focus on prevention, including families and those with lived experience in the advisory group. I'll call it the advisory group, you called it something else. And then also the role of the judiciary and whether or not they can accommodate the 60-day review. Those questions, it sounds, would seem to me, are ongoing. And your target is October for the final plan. Will we have some answers to those questions by then?
I believe we'll have greater clarity. The hope is by then, for sure. That will be our initial submission. It's taking plus or minus, it's taking about 6 months to have plans approved with revisions along the way during that time. In addition to that, the important thing to know is that we are able to submit amendments during the entire 5 years of the plan, which makes it really nice for us to, further explore and tweak things along the way so that we make sure that, what we think is right now is still right a year or 2 or 3 or 5 going forward.
Well, that also may answer the question about legislative involvement. So as the committees of jurisdiction review the plan, there may be some suggestions that would be supportive.
Absolutely. I think there's ongoing opportunity for sure.
Exactly. I agree 100%.
Terrific. I know I was thinking about your invitation to be at bi-weekly meetings in addition to the other meetings that we're having. And with all due respect, I think we'll hold off, at least I will hold off and wait and see what is produced in October. I don't know about
Understood. But there's always an open invitation just to even come to an occasional meeting, just so you can see what's going on the ground.
and
Absolutely.
greatly appreciated. Thank you. Oh,
And I'm happy to provide Cliff Notes anytime.
okay. Committee, do you have other questions now? You also have Elizabeth Hawgood and Amy Rose on. We have Amy Rose from Voices to respond a little bit. So Elizabeth, is it time for Elizabeth to provide information?
Yes.
Okay, terrific.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth or Eli Hawgood, and I'm the FFPSA grant manager. And I'm just very honored to have this position as well as to be speaking to you today. I feel very strongly about the amazing system changes that we're looking at and the reforms that we are bringing through FFPSA. So FFPSA also adds requirements on the state of Vermont to continue to draw down Title IV-E funds for residential treatment of children in DCF custody. So beginning on October 1st, 2021, the Title IV-E drawdown for congregate care placements is only allowed when a child or youth needs cannot be met in a community setting. And the federal regulations, they really emphasize that a shortage or a lack of foster family homes shall not be an acceptable reason for determining that the needs of the child can't be met in the community. To establish what is the appropriate level of care for the child, an independent evaluation and a judicial determination must be made regarding the level of placement. And we too have been thinking about the family court bandwidth as, of course, this is a complex systems change, and it might impact other partners. So we have had conversations both internally and externally for how to best approach this. And I anticipate that there will be initiatives coming through the normal process very shortly from people who are higher up than me. Next slide, please.
Are we still looking? Oh, okay, good. Thank you.
An estimated 350 placements of children will need to be evaluated per year, as a new assessment is required with every placement. But these placements represent about 150 to 200 children. So with the current reforms, DCF anticipates that there's going to be fewer future transfers and placement, and is instituting systems to assess appropriate level of care prior to placement. For example, doing this assessment before the child is placed into a residential treatment program. And of these placements in the last fiscal year, 286 of the placements were for youth ages 12 to 17, and 64 of the placements were for a child younger than age 12. Next slide, please. So So for the 30-day assessment, the assessment is to determine if the child's needs can be met in the community or if the child needs a higher level of care. And this can also be called a level of care determination. So it must be completed within 30 days of the congregate care placement to allow for any Title IV-E drawdown. The assessment must be completed by an independent clinician or professional. And it must be done using an evidence-based tool. And we've decided that our assessor will be using the Child and Adolescent Needs and Strengths tool, which is also called the CANS. And the assessor's recommendation, yep, there we go, thank you. The recommendation will also consider information learned from conversations with the treatment team. The treatment team is made up of family and kin and previous providers to determine if the child's needs can be met in the community, and whether the child needs a higher level of care. But if the assessor disagrees with the treatment team about the level of care that the child needs, the assessor must explain in writing in that assessment. And then, next slide, please. And then in many cases, it will go on to a 60-day judicial review. And the residential placement of the child must be affirmed within 60 days of the placement in order for DCF to draw down Title IV-E funds to fund the treatment program. But for Medicaid eligible residential treatment, this review wouldn't apply. DCF predicts that some of the placements will be agreed upon by all parties to the case, which would only require a record review and a signed order. But then, of course, some of them will have more complex concerns about the level of care. And so for those cases, there may need to be a hearing. And then there will also be situations where the child's placement will never make it to the 60-day judicial review. So, for example, a child could be discharged based on their progress or the assessment. The assessment may be enmeshed into the ICPC procedure and the ICPC order, so that that doesn't go to a separate hearing or a separate review. Or a child may be transferred to a different placement, and that would require a new assessment, and then it would require a new 30-day assessment and then a new 60-day review. Next slide, please. So I'm wondering, Senator Sears, if that answered your questions, and if others have any other questions that I can answer for you.
It does not answer, well, it does answer to some extent some of my questions, but I still don't understand, unless I'm missing something, how the courts will have time to do these hearings. I mean, they're backed up tremendously. We just had jury draw in Bennington, for example, on a child molestation case where, one juror turned up with COVID, and so now they've delayed that jury till October. How are we going to get into the courts to have them do the reviews? And I'm thinking particularly if a kid is out of state, for example, if you determine that this kid needs a specialized program that's only available in Minnesota, how are you going to do all that? I mean, I just am really concerned. I understand that congregate living situations are somewhat questionable in terms of the federal and the new world. But be that as it may, my experience with even getting kids in back when I was doing it, when you had to have a 6 month and a year review, was even difficult. And you had requirements that social workers visit their kid in placement every 30 days. Even that was almost impossible for many. So I'm just concerned that what'll happen here is we won't get the funding. And you said at the middle of somewhere in there about Medicaid, if the kid is Medicaid eligible, this doesn't mean anything. What, could you clarify that, please?
Yes, so this is just the Title IV-E drawdown procedure, and Title IV-E is the payer of last resort. And so if a child could be eligible for Medicaid funding, then it's just CMS regulations and procedures that apply, and
So
not Title IV-E.
my experience is almost 100% of the kids in residential treatment have been deemed Medicaid eligible. I can't remember many that weren't.
I
Is
know that
true?
so I know that calculations have been done regarding the 4E payment and what could be lost in 4E funding for residential care. But I would have to get back to you regarding the specific numbers.
Could I ask, Madam Chair, that a future agenda include Judge Gerson to at least give us an update on the court's ability to do this?
It makes a lot of sense. We will certainly do that. Since this plan is to be completed by October, it might make sense to look at it in conjunction with that final plan process. So it'll either be September, October. Does that work for you?
Yeah, no, that's, I mean, I just, I'm really concerned about both the treatment team, whatever we called that. I can't, I'm having a hard time finding the right word, but I'm more concerned about the courts being able to even stick with a 60-day review of any, they are so backed up right now.
And that's definitely.
Oh, Eli, I just wanted to add, Senator Sears, I understand your concern. As a former judge, I absolutely know about court backlogs, and you have a strong point about how this could be managed. But I do know we have been speaking with Judge Gerson. We do have some ideas about how to implement this, and it may not necessarily be run through the traditional court system. We have some other ideas that are in the works that have been successful in other states or that are already up and running with this. So we're hopeful that given the deadlines that we will be able to have a system that works with these assessments. But you're on point that it's something that we can't ignore. They're already backed up, and this is additional work.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Deputy Commissioner. I'm not trying to be argumentative here. I'm just trying to be realistic at how this is going to work. And I've been concerned about this from the day I heard about it, because I think we've been doing this more or less informally for years, trying to make kinship care or family care the priority and not use residential treatment or even foster care when it's not necessary. So I don't think that the general philosophy of this is anything different for Vermont. It's just some of the requirements appear to be onerous in this one particular. So I appreciate the answers from all three of you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And it will be helpful to look at what we have, what we can do, and what changes should be made going forward so that we can have the federal government support, but also improve the system that we've got. I think that's probably, we need to be practical in this area. So Representative Jessup has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question concerns any penalties, financial or otherwise, that might be associated with either failing to meet various benchmarks. For example, Senator Sears raised the 60-day judicial hearing, and even if there were a workaround, there may be circumstances that are beyond control. And I'm wondering what sorts of things are in the legislation in terms of penalties. Are there, for example, clawback provisions when it comes to federal funding?
In regard to the 60-day hearings, is that correct?
Actually, that's just the thing that comes to mind right now based on the Q&A that's happened this morning. But I'm guessing that there are penalties for missing what seems a fairly prescriptive piece of legislation.
So if the 60-day hearing does not happen, then 4E drawdown can only exist for those first 60 days. And then for the 30-day assessment, If the 30-day assessment does not happen within 30 days, then there will be no Title IV drawdown. That is something that we've had at the forefront of our minds during the contracting and the RFP process to ensure that the successful bidder who we will be contracting with is able to make that deadline to get the assessment in by the first 30 days. And of course, in the ideal world, and what we're really working towards is getting that assessment done even before residential placement. So we're not even touching the timeline. And the reason why this is so important is to be able to put the child in a program or into treatment that's really going to work for them. So it comes back to what Beth was saying regarding best practice, that we, beyond just the strictures of FFPSA, we want to put a child into clinical or residential treatment that is going to help them with whatever mental health needs they may have. And we don't want to have to be moving them or disrupting any type of placement later on.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess I haven't spent the time that all of you have digging into the legislation, but there are, as we know, kids who are moved around. There are deadlines missed. There are plans that go astray, and I'm sort of more focused on that versus the best case scenario. Not trying to be pessimistic, but simply trying to be realistic in terms of weighing the pros and cons.
Good questions. I think there is a lot of concern about being able to meet the goals and the timelines. That would go for the 30-day assessment as well. And do we have sufficient folks available to do that assessment? So keep us posted, please. And when we come back to this, we'll be asking your thoughts again, I think. Any other questions, committee, for, is it Eli or Elizabeth?
Eli.
All right. Any other questions for the grant manager for DCF, Eli? Okay, thank you. This is a good introduction for us, and I'm sure we'll be seeing you again, and we'll be following up on the questions that our committee members have asked. So
Thank you so much. Thank you so much
well,
for the
thank you.
opportunity to come and speak.
Yes, thank you. Okay,
Thank you very much.
Amy Rose is here from Voices for Vermont Children.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. For the record, my name is Amy Rose. I am a policy associate with Voices for Vermont's Children.
Amy, is there any way you can speak closer to your microphone?
I will try my best.
All right, terrific. Thank you.
Voices for Vermont's Children supports policies and practices that will advance child health and safety. Within that context, it is important to acknowledge how complicated the current child protection system is and how much gray area there is within the work. Voices is grateful for the research that continues to evolve and are humbled by the ways in which our thinking is continuously challenged as we tackle this work. We are grateful for the opportunity to share what we have learned from impacted people, from the state, from providers, and from other states and countries. Voices recognizes the historical context that created the systems that we inherited, and we would like to focus our testimony today on the possibilities ahead. We see Families First as an opportunity to think about our work differently in Vermont. Many of our suggestions extend beyond the Family Services Division to address the root causes of family stress, trauma, and instability, many of which derive from historical and ongoing inequities baked into our systems. Families First gives us the opportunity to ask, how can we best support families in Vermont? First, we must invest in families. In order for families to be vulnerable and willing to seek support, we need to remove the stigma of accessing support and the surveillance that often comes with the programs that we offer. Much of the language in this section of my testimony is not my own. It comes directly from the Upend movement. I provided a link to Upend in my written testimony in case anyone is interested in looking more deeply into their work. Our investment in families must include the elimination of poverty. Research has documented the stress of poverty on families and on parenting. This stress is within our collective power to end by ensuring a universal basic income for all adults, a child allowance for each child, paid parental leave for families welcoming new children, paid sick leave, and a job guarantee with a living wage. Immigration status should not determine access to these or other financial supports. It is also critical to ensure that all are housed. This should include a wide spectrum of options, including emergency housing for the unexpected situations. Our investment in families should always include support for other basic needs. There are many critical supports that families need, which require significant policy and practice changes, including access to quality food, transportation, childcare, and health and mental health care. Additionally, the Upend movement recommends and Voices supports implementing a reparations framework for all of our work. A reparations framework acknowledges and repairs the past harms and injustices that Black people have experienced in this country because of slavery and continued oppression. Reparations also requires acknowledging and repairing the harm of genocide, colonization, and repeated violations of treaties and trusts done to Native communities. Second, we can all listen more. National data shows us that youth who have a say in their placements are less likely to have placement disruptions. Investment in kinship and fictive kin options whenever possible to support continuity in children's lives. This takes time and resources, but it is worth the investment. We also need to invest in our family support workers and ensure that they have the time, training, and support to do this work well. While we heard that caseloads are down on average, we were alarmed to hear about the disparities around the state. We need to understand why some offices have such high rates of turnover and staff vacancies. Third, Vermont needs to invest in a data system that supports good work. Our state workers are asked to use a DOS-based case management system from the 1980s. We have heard many stories of poor practice that are caused by lack of access to information. This includes errors in placement history, family history, medical history, and more. This work is difficult and our relationships with family support workers are delicate. When these mistakes happen, youth feel disposable and relationships can become toxic. In addition, our future work should be based on accurate outcome data. It is difficult to separate actual trends from perceived trends without accurate and accessible data. Voices urges this committee to work with the governor to prioritize a nimble and effective data system. Voices also urges the state to look into a system that allows families and foster families to access information directly, and one that gives youth access to their records as they transition out of care. Fourth, Voices recommends that Vermont look at our court system, its strengths and its challenges. Some jurisdictions in other states are investing in restorative child protection systems. While restorative practices requires careful attention to power dynamics and unintended consequences, they may offer a less adversarial and more sustainable approach to child protection. Others are looking at mediation options pre-merits. While Voices agrees that it is important to have a system with checks and balances, we have heard concerns about the way in which the court process, which is adversarial by design, makes it difficult for teams to work together. And fifth, we need to create opportunities to heal violence. Healing historical, familial, community, and systemic violence is difficult work, but it is necessary in order to create safe spaces for our children and our youth. The current Families First legislation does not create funding mechanisms to do all of this work. However, it emboldens us all to shift our thinking and our practice dramatically and purposefully to reduce the number of kids who experience trauma. Fewer children in care could save the state money, but it does not guarantee better outcomes for kids. Meeting the needs of children and families is the path to a healthier, thriving Vermont. Creative thinking will open up new ways to support children and youth well while navigating life's stressors. Finally, we need to continue to take steps towards a more transparent and accountable system. The Office of Child, Youth, and Family Advocate is one step towards that goal. We need to look closely at the entire system, its strengths and its challenges. It is also important to revisit newer policies, Vermont's Family First implementation plan included, to see if they're having the intended impact. The post-adoption contact agreement is a prime example of a shift in practice that I supported, yet I often hear that it is causing more harm than good. As we continue to learn together, we need to be able to reflect on the conditions that created the system we have, the intent of past legislation, and the outcomes that we are getting. By allowing impacted people to share their firsthand experiences and reflections, we will learn a great deal about where we need to go next. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you very much, Amy. I think we do not have your testimony on our webpage.
Yes, it's up. I put it up probably after you looked.
Okay, well, so we just refresh and we'll find it.
Yep.
I apologize, I sent it late today.
Don't apologize. We have it. That's what counts. Thank you. Questions for Amy and Voices for Vermont's Children? Are you part of the group of 80 or do you work with a smaller group and DCF?
That's a great question. I have participated in a couple of those meetings. Unfortunately, they're at a time where I have another standing meeting, so I haven't been able to attend all of them. I have participated in several other stakeholder meetings.
And then I have another question, and that is, you know, as you're talking, of course, about the issues around diversity and different folks being affected, are there any lessons that we could learn from your experience from the refugee resettlement program? And then I'm thinking in particular, what will happen as Afghan refugees come into the state, and how we help those folks may inform some of the work that we're looking at today.
That's a great question. And I do think that it's important to be proactive and think about ways in which we can be prepared for different demographics in Vermont. I don't want to speak specifically on how to prepare for Afghan refugees. I imagine that refugees
I don't think anybody can.
would have great information on that. But I do think we can learn a lot from folks who have experienced the system already. And so between our nonprofits and folks who have encountered DCF support and it's gone well, or folks who have felt like there's room for improvement, is a great place to look to see how we can do things differently.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, committee? Thank you very much for being here and for your comments and your testimony. We'll go back and review those again. All right, so given that, I think we'll move on at this point. We're a little bit behind schedule, but we should be okay. We've asked Linda Johnson, the Executive Director of Prevent Child Abuse Vermont, to come in and talk about the funding for Prevent Child Abuse and then the work that you have done. And so, Linda, you have testimony. You've given us a number of articles, but you have testimony and you also have the funding history for from DCF for Prevent Child Abuse Vermont. So we'll turn it over to you.
Well, good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Joint Legislative Oversight Child Protection Committee. I'm very honored to present to you our testimony this morning. For the record, I'm Linda E. Johnson, Executive Director of Prevent Child Abuse Vermont. We're a statewide private nonprofit organization, 45 years old, using only evidence-based, proven effective, persistently evaluated, developmentally appropriate, and trauma-informed programs. Thank you for inviting me to provide an overview on how PCAVT educates, supports, and trains others to prevent child abuse and how COVID-19 has impacted our work. We have 3 departments. There are family support programs, child sexual abuse prevention, and shaken baby syndrome, abusive head trauma prevention, and safe sleep promotion. Our family support programs are directed by Dr. Steve Ness, a psychologist with a team of 4 coordinators who are located in West Paulet, Montpelier, Colchester, and St. Johnsbury, really covering the state. Each is responsible for 3 or 4 counties. Prior to COVID, they recruited, trained, and supported 170 to 190 volunteer facilitators, mostly professionals, to lead 50 to 60 group-based nurturing parenting programs, strengthening families programs, and Circle of Parents support groups annually. These programs are designed to prevent child abuse and substance misuse as well. Each uses RBA and a scientifically validated evaluation tool that is well regarded. We report outcomes for every program every year. I'm attaching research studies for your further review. Programs are free, and before COVID, childcare and dinner was always provided. Prior to COVID, we served 600 to 700 high-risk parents and about 1,100 to 1,200 children annually. The opioid crisis, starting around 2014, changed how many families came to us. Now, 75% of the families we see are in recovery from substance abuse and are referred by DCF, Family Court, DOC, and other treatment and prevention providers, with almost 80% required to attend. Most don't have custody of the children, and they are joining the program to reunify. About 2/3 of the children are in kinship or foster care. Prior to COVID, about 20 of our programs took place in correctional facilities and in communities with clients on probation, parole, or furlough. Since COVID began, our programs could not meet in person in corrections facilities. We continue to serve DOC clients online who are living in communities and eagerly await being able to be back in prisons again. This change decreased the number of parents we were able to serve by close to 200 annually. Before and continuing through the pandemic, we partner with district DCF offices, parent-child centers, turning point centers, Head Starts, probation, parole district offices, schools, communities of faith, and other family-serving organizations. We have nearly 200 partnerships. Before COVID, many provided facilitators, other space, and all continue to refer families. The nurturing programs and strengthening families programs are 10 to 18 weeks long and are curriculum-based. Circles meet weekly, year-round, and are professionally facilitated with a peer leader. Prior to COVID, children attended and participated in nurturing programs and strengthening families programs. All programs offer childcare for younger children. Currently, due to COVID, we are unable to directly work with the children. In March of 2020, the 4 coordinators successfully pivoted to live interactive online platforms, allowing parents from across Vermont to participate in groups together. Many volunteer facilitators were uncomfortable leading groups online. The coordinators stepped up, and now they facilitate or co-facilitate all our programs. In between meetings, they call parents once or twice a week to check in, make sure they have food and other essential needs met, offering support and decreasing their sense of isolation. With virtual programs, parents no longer worry about transportation, racing to pick up the children to get to a meeting. Parents meet with other parents struggling with similar issues from across the state and from their homes. Consequently, parents feel a greater sense of privacy as they're less apt to be in a group with a neighbor from their own community. Parents tell us they much prefer meeting online. This is the fastest I think I've ever talked. But I'm doing it. As all of you know well, not every Vermonter has access to the internet or a computer. Our deputy director acquired 64 laptops so far for parents who lack them. This has not only aided parents in attending programs, but helped in other important ways, such as looking for jobs, food, housing, staying in touch with their children and other relatives and friends, as well as helping children to do their schoolwork. We helped and will continue to help many families without internet get on for as little as $10 a month. In the state fiscal year 2021, we carried out 51 programs serving 394 high-risk parents and their 710 children, about 65% of whom were in kinship, foster, or residential care. We will continue delivering mostly online programs for the foreseeable future, though we have also started doing a few hybrid programs at Turning Point centers at their request. These may or may not remain hybrid. We'll see. Shortly after COVID impacted Vermont, we adapted and published the Parents and Caregivers Guide to COVID-19. We sent thousands of copies to DCF offices, Head Starts, and parent-child centers. It is currently available on our website, as is our Vermont Parents Home Companion and Resource Directory, now in its 31st edition. We wrote 28 blogs for our website's Parent Corner regarding ways parents and children can cope and thrive during the pandemic. It is the most frequented part of our website. The Vermont Parents Helpline, 1-800-CHILDREN, is part of our family support programs. When COVID hit, our calls doubled in the first 3 months and then settled back down to a more typical pace. In total for 2020, we received 510 calls impacting 921 children and youth at risk. In the first half of 2021, we've received 213 calls impacting another 389 children and youth at risk. At the onset of COVID from March 2020, calls have remained more acute. Parents have been expressing great stress and abuse was occurring or very likely to occur. There were many more calls involving drugs and alcohol affecting parenting and violence between partners as well. Children were clearly in more danger behind closed doors and masks. Though there were countless parents that managed to provide safe, nurturing environments for their children, others were not. Some did great harm to children, or their partners did, physically, emotionally, and or sexually. Many stayed with partners only to keep income stable or to have childcare. Technology was a concern too. As parents were so overwhelmed, it was challenging to monitor their children's activities online. Some children and youth experienced cyberbullying or sextortion from peers and predation from individuals known to the child, as well as strangers online. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children reported that online predation was up more than 90% during this year. Since most children do not tell about sexual abuse until their older teen years, or actually 51 is the medium age for when people tell about this abuse. It will perhaps be decades before we fully understand what has happened to children and youth, while teachers and other trusted adults were not with them under normal circumstances. This leads us to our next department. PCAVT's child sexual abuse prevention programs are led by Dr. Marcy Hambrick and delivered with two outstanding trainers, Joy Kitchell and Kirsty Grant. Child sexual abuse remains the #1 form of child abuse reported and founded in Vermont, though it has decreased by 61% since 1992, when PCAVT began offering well-researched child sexual abuse prevention, training, and education. PCAVT's child sexual abuse prevention programs meet the Vermont's Act 1 criteria, the 2009 Act relating to improving Vermont's sexual abuse response system. Thank you, Senator Sears. PCAVT is a member of the National Coalition of Child Sexual Abuse and Exploitation and partners with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. The latter requested our help to update and train their organization on how to effectively prevent child sexual abuse, as it is often the reason why youth run away and become exploited. Prior to COVID, we did more than 100 trainings per year for childcare providers licensed and registered, and after-school staff in person. Since COVID, we changed from in-person to online live interactive trauma-informed victimization prevention trainings, and now are delivering more than 130 trainings per year. I've listed the trainings here, so please take a look at them. I won't read them to you. Currently, these trainings for adult Vermonters are free, thanks to a one-time gift from a now defunct organization, the Vermont Child Care Industry and Careers Council. However, as of January 2022, there will no longer be any designated funding for these trainings, which continue to be in very high demand. It is important to explain that in July 2020, DCF's Child Development Division ended the grant we had received for 25 years, supporting this training for childcare and after-school providers at no cost to them. This grant was TANF funded for $117,000 and met the TANF guidelines as it helped provide children with safe and healthy environments in childcare settings. This work successfully resulted in great decrease in child-on-child sexual abuse, which is responsible now for only 12% of all child sexual abuse in Vermont. This is actually a 77% decrease since the early 1990s and a 61% decrease in number of child victims in Vermont. Nationally, the number is 30 to 50% child on child being responsible for child sexual abuse. So this is outstanding. In December 2019, we were told this important grant was ending, as it was not considered appropriate for TANF funding, and that if other funds were found, this grant would have to be put out for bid. We have still not seen an RFP for these services we could apply for. They suggested we charge providers for attending the training, knowing how important and effective our trainings are, which we reluctantly did. The results were that only a third of the usual number of attendees came. Childcare providers and human service workers in general do not have lots of money to spend on multiple trainings. Commissioner Brown deserves all the praise in the world for restoring funding for this work in January 2021, and also allowing us to broaden the scope of who we trained. This support resulted in twice the number of participants in this period. Specifically, in years past, we would train about 900 to 1,000 childcare and after-school providers annually, and 984 attended in just 6 months, from January to June 21. However, this special funding ended in June 21. The legislature will need to restore these funds with a grant to PCAVT through the Family Services Division of Child Development, or Child Development Division, to ensure the future of these powerful and proven effective trainings. The safety of Vermont's children rides on this legislative action. Please see the evaluations of these trainings by going to PCAVT's website, pcavt.pcavt.org, and look under research. PCAVT also provides school-based child sexual abuse prevention education, teaching through social emotional skills, so important, known as the Healthy Relationships Project. Starting in the mid-1990s, before COVID, we served 15 to 45 schools per year, depending on funding. We received $45,000 annually through a grant from DCF Family Services, which has been critical. Since COVID, as you can understand, we were not permitted to enter schools to help teachers provide instruction, so we changed our approach. We now train teachers, school counselors, and health educators online to deliver HRP with technical assistance from our trainers via email, phone, and Zoom. Our trainers continue to deliver parent, staff, and faculty trainings live online. We know that this year we had moderate success, as it was challenging for educators to include HRP in the limited and inconsistent time they had with students. The 3 HRP programs are Care for Kids, We Care Elementary, and Safety. These curriculum-based programs include developmentally appropriate trauma-informed student lessons, training for school staff, faculty, and administration, and parent nights that include a program overview, and then specific topics such as Technicool, keeping kids safe on the internet, nurturing healthy sexual development. Every school decides which trainings they want for their parents. PCAVT has trained and supported more than 3/4 of all elementary and middle schools, Head Starts, and countless preschools and childcare centers in use of HRP programs in Vermont. We have also supported some residential programs too. As there is relatively high turnover in early childhood programs, schools, and residential programs, our work is never done. The safety program has been validated by the Crimes Against Children Center at the University of New Hampshire at Durham and the Connecticut Department of Health, replicating the center's study. Each of the HRP programs are in alignment with CDC's recommendations for child sexual abuse prevention and are forerunners in the field. We are the go-to chapter of Prevent Child Abuse America regarding best practice for child sexual abuse prevention. We train other trainers from child advocacy centers and domestic and sexual violence prevention organizations and other organizations in Vermont to bring HRP into schools, because really we can't be everywhere. PCAVT's trainers have remained in high demand at virtual national conferences as presenters and recently delivered the brain development on when consent can be successfully taught to children, and the vulnerability of LGBTQ children and youth to sexual abuse. We're planning to develop both of these presentations, as well as compassionate confrontation with accountability, for additional online trainings for Vermont adults caring for and working with children, youth, and parents. Although COVID's many challenges have changed our method of delivering child sexual abuse prevention, and we've turned these challenges into productive opportunities. Shaken Baby Syndrome, abusive head trauma prevention, and safe sleep promotion have been part of our work for the last 20 years. Before we began, Vermont experienced 6 to 9 babies being shaken every year. About 1/3 died, 1/3 had permanent injuries, and 1/3 recovered with possible learning disabilities not detectable at the time of harm. In the last few years, these numbers have gone down to 0 to 3 per year. Unsafe sleep deaths began to rise after the opioid crisis. Too many impaired parents and caregivers sleeping with their babies is one likely cause of these tragedies, but not all. Before COVID, we understood that there were as many as 6 to 9 unsafe sleep deaths per year. We stepped up our efforts to educate, and so did the health department, providing information to parents in a variety of ways. Since COVID, we do not have the numbers. PCAVT has continued providing materials for parents of newborns in welcome baby bags in all Vermont hospital maternity units. We provide hospitals with videos for parents to view and pledge forms for parents to read and sign, or after the nurse reads it to them before leaving the hospital. The pledge form explains how to safely comfort a crying baby and the dangers of shaking. There's a space for parents to sign, promising to share this information with all their baby's caregivers. These interventions are the result of research by Dr. Mark Diaz, a well-respected pediatric neurologist whose work reduced the incidence of shaken baby by half. Our results have been more like 2/3. Some hospitals do these latter two interventions and some choose not to, but all share flyers and materials we provide. Anne Shangra has led this initiative and been our single trainer for the past 8 years. Before COVID, Anne traveled the state delivering training in person to 1/3 of all high school student freshmen in their health classes. Anne also presented to adolescent parents in alternative high school programs at parent-child centers and other programs for at-risk parents. Anne traveled childcare and trained childcare providers at their locations and regional meetings as well. In any given year, Anne delivered about 190 per year trainings and about how to safely care for a crying baby or frustrated toddler, the dangers of shaking, and how to ensure infants are safe when they are sleeping. After COVID hit, Anne could no longer present in person in schools or anywhere. Anne became able and comfortable with delivering trainings live on interactive platforms. Schools made it work as students came back to classrooms. Anne was on the screen. Anne delivered more than 200 trainings a year, though not in person, to a wider audience of human services and medical professionals, many of whom receive CEUs for the training. For the past 20 years or so, the state has provided $89,000 and now $90,000 to ensure this work is accomplished. In truth, if we could reach more students before they begin to parent, we would save more lives and prevent more injuries. An increase of $70,000 would allow us to hire an additional trainer and cover twice as much ground. Shaken baby syndrome, abusive head trauma, and unsafe sleep are the most common ways infants and toddlers die, other than illness and accidents. These are preventable deaths and injuries. If we do not prevent them, we all lose. We have continued to use pre and post tests at every training, and our results are extremely positive. Most participants rate their increased knowledge and skills at 90 to 100% regarding SBS, AHT, and for ensuring safe sleep for infants and toddlers. Conclusion. Based on our experience, we believe wholeheartedly that the need for prevention is great, and it is actually greater than it was before COVID. Parents, children, and youth need skills and support to survive intermittent isolation and food insecurity, and even the underlying stress that remains such a part of all our daily lives. Everyone is struggling with this invisible virus and the power to make people of all ages very ill and possibly die or survive long-term effects. At Prevent Child Abuse Vermont, we believe strongly that most parents love and want to care for their children well, and most children just want good enough parents, caring friendships, and safe and healthy school and community environments. They're depending on all of us to make it work. Thank you for inviting me to speak with you today about how we work and how we've been impacted by the pandemic. We hope that as budgets are considered in the coming year, the legislature will consider our funding requests that I have mentioned in my testimony today. Please do not hesitate to reach out to me or my staff with any questions. And please note, we provided you with a sheet on our funding history from 2018 to the present.
Thank you. You did that with alacrity.
Thank you. That means a lot.
questions committee for Linda around child abuse? No questions. Well, you know, you've given us a lot to consider and to look through. I guess one of the questions I have is to what extent are you involved in working with DCF on the Family First Plan? Are you involved in that process?
Yes, thank you so much for asking. We have been part of the process on the interagency committee of 80, so to speak. And we are fingers crossed that our proven effective nurturing parenting program, strengthening families and circles will be included in the plan. If there were more funds available, we would be able to work with so many more families. And these programs work. And, you know, we work with families who have already hurt their children, want to stop, want to reunify, want to heal from their own trauma growing up. And these are very deep, very effective programs. Tremendous amount of research behind all of them, but they don't all carry the exact sort of research that Families First is requiring on this first round. So we're hoping that we will be one of the promising programs to be considered and included in some fashion. But
And that sort of leads to my second question, which is, as you've been going through the information, you have identified some very significant outcomes from the work that you're doing. So I don't need a long answer here, but just in terms of your data collection and analysis to get to those outcomes, do you have a robust data collection and analysis?
We do. We do. And in fact, for our nurturing parenting programs and strengthening families programs, we send our data to another center that calculates all the results from our pre and post tests. We use the Adult Adolescent Parenting Inventory, which is a continuously renormed instrument that is just very well respected. It's got about 34 items on it. It's quite extensive, and parents are awfully good about filling it in. And we explain to them that our funding depends on it, and they're really good about it. And that's, we.
And then last question. Thank you for that. That's extremely helpful. So what I'm looking at in your funding table is DCF funding. Do you also receive funding from the national organization?
No,
Okay.
We send them $2,000 a year for membership.
But you do get some services, it sounds like.
We get access to the latest research, and the best thing about it is that I have 49 other executive directors who have the same job I have across the country to rely upon for the latest and greatest of this or that. And so that is quite a tour de force, I can tell you. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
You're
Committee
welcome.
questions?
Yeah, could I just follow up on Linda's comment about, and thank you, Linda, for
Senator Sears, you're muted.
Oh, God, that's the only well, it's not the only problem with Zoom, but one of the big ones. I'm either muted when I shouldn't be, and I'm not muted when I should be. Trying to follow up on that comment you made about the Families First program and whether or not your programs would be eligible for funding, and maybe Deputy Commissioner Radke, or we can find out at a future meeting if you can't answer that. But I'd like to understand how exactly a proven program would be excluded from funding in this new world.
You have to be on the list. And the list.
That's a little scary, isn't it?
I
You have
know.
to be on
I
the list.
know. We've been invited to submit, and we are going to submit our child sexual abuse prevention work to the California Clearinghouse on Child Abuse and Neglect. That is the list of lists. The Nurturing Parenting Program is considered a promising program, although it has more than 40-something years of, more than 40 research studies, but just not exactly the way the California Clearinghouse wants it. And Strengthening Families is also on the list as a promising program. Dr. Mark Diaz's approach, I don't know if it's on the California Clearinghouse. I'm not at all sure that it is, but that kind of primary prevention that we do with child sexual abuse and Shaken Baby and Safe Sleep is not the focus of Families First. Families First is working with kids who are already in the soup, as it were. So our nurturing programs and Strengthening Families programs and Circle of Parents, which really is based on the Parents Anonymous model, they would be a fit. But all our other work is primary prevention and is designed to actually prevent child abuse before it occurs.
Right.
That is not the focus of Families First.
I've already, thank you for that explanation. And if we can't get an explanation today, I would like, as we continue to look at Families First, as to why programs like that would not be eligible.
That's a really, we'll put that into the hopper for our either September or October meeting when we hear further. And Deputy Commissioner Radke, it looks like you were going to comment. Why don't you go ahead?
Well, I was going to comment that Beth would be the best person to address that and give you a nice, concise answer. And if she can hop on, I sent her a quick text before we end today. I'm sure we can get you an answer. But if not, of course, the following meeting, we'll make sure to address it fully.
Thank you very much.
Okay, that's great. All right, committee, other questions for Linda Johnson? Linda, thank you for taking the time to put all that information together. It is extremely helpful and greatly appreciated.
I appreciate the work of this committee, and it's an honor to be before you. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Deputy Commissioner Radke, you are up next. I know that our time has gotten very compressed. And given that we just talked about Child Abuse Vermont, I don't know whether, how much time, if we went until 12:30, would that be sufficient time for you to go through the report?
Yes, and what I was thinking was, because I sort of had comments on just about each page, but as we go to a page and you look at it, if the committee feels like, well, we know about that, we don't want to discuss it, I can always just skip to the next page too, just to make sure I'm making good use of your time.
Okay, and so are you going through the report itself? I see you've got the report itself here.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, so I think helping us through the executive summary and then the highlights that you think are key for us would be helpful.
Great. Okay, I'm going to pull it up right now.
All right. It's up.
Oh, good.
All
I
right.
wanted to see if I can make it smaller. Good. Okay.
He said, I want you to lock this door from now on. I don't want Jimmy Haley to talk about it.
All right.
You?
Well, and you see the report?
Yes, great.
Okay. Okay. So, hello again. As you know, I'm Erica Radke, Deputy Commissioner for Family Services Division. What I want to do before we go to the main part of the report is just go to page 3, where I want to bring to your attention the impact COVID has had on our child protection data, since I know that this will be more of a data-driven discussion. We noticed a drop in the number of child abuse and neglect reports made to our child protection line in 2020 as compared to 2019. And we do believe this is because of when everything shut down due to the pandemic, families were isolated at home, and the people that we would normally expect to call the hotline, such as mandated reporters or family or friends, just didn't have access to the children to see problems as they were occurring. Because the risk of abuse could increase due to stressors related to the pandemic, such as Linda Johnson clearly mentioned in her presentation, things like job loss, isolation, and health issues. In response, FSD provided guidance to mandated reporters about how to continue to evaluate child safety during the pandemic. And as Vermont has begun reopening, we have noticed that the number of reports to our hotline has returned to more expected levels. On page 4, this is a joint message from myself and Commissioner Brown. It just discusses some of the initiatives we've started in order to enhance our system of care. I know that both of us have previously discussed before the committee the impact of the closure of Woodside, the pandemic, and how staffing shortages have had an impact on our system of care as a whole, and also the projects that we've initiated to address these issues. So I won't spend a lot of time here, but I just want to mention that our efforts are ongoing to develop more placements for children and youth in our custody. And as an update, we do have one caregiver that has not only met the licensing requirements, but also has taken the crisis intervention and de-escalation techniques training. Right now, we're waiting for the contract for an enhanced rate to be put into place. And that'll be our first home brought online for our specialized crisis intervention foster care homes. So that was something we're really excited about, to get some traction there. And in terms of the Wells River Treatment Facility, we did have the Act 250 hearing just this week. So things are progressing there as well. Certainly not as quickly as we'd like, but there's definitely some forward momentum. Page 6 is about just reports of suspected child abuse and neglect, and it talks about the numbers of reports that we've received on the hotline. Is this the page you would like me to go through, or I can move forward?
No, I think you need to inform us based on what you believe will be most helpful.
I see. Yeah, let's talk about this page. As I mentioned, there were the reports received at our hotline did decrease in 2020. There was actually a 22% decrease as compared to 2019, likely due to the pandemic. The vast majority of these calls did come in from mandated reporters, specifically educators. They by far made the most reports at 24%. So although we did notice a decrease, individuals that are mandated by law to make these reports when they do see likely abuse or harm, they did try to step up and continue to make those reports.
So as you've moved into 2021, have you seen an increase in those calls? I mean, as the emergency obviously has ended in Vermont. Go ahead.
That's a good question. And yes, we have. I don't have the most current data at my fingertips, but I can tell you that even as of March 2021, we noticed that the numbers again were back into the positive in terms of comparing 2019 to 2020. So that gap was already eradicated, and we're back up to the number of calls that we would expect. Not necessarily more calls than we would expect, but back on track. So that just means that people are having more access to the children. They are accessing the hotline, and they're making those calls. And our CIES unit is processing those calls as they come in.
Thank you.
This says on page 8 here, I do want to talk about this one. This chart provides additional detail, just quantifying the child safety interventions at FSD. In 2020, there were almost 16,000 calls to our child protection hotline. And of those calls, 23% were accepted for intervention. And that is in line with previous year's acceptance rates. There were 2,016 assessments and 1,604 investigations. 794 cases were opened for ongoing services, and some 527 investigations were substantiated, meaning that the results of the investigation would lead a reasonable person to believe that the child in question was being abused or neglected. And I wanted to point out this page because it just shows that although things have improved over the years, child abuse continues to be a significant problem in our state. And we are, we're taking the calls and we're absolutely going out and investigating and doing the assessments necessary to determine whether or not these cases are, whether children need to be brought into custody, whether families need to be helped otherwise with supports and services to take care of the children.
Can I just ask a quick question about that slide?
Oh, absolutely.
The intake report, then you go down to the investigation, and you have a group that are unsubstantiated, low or moderate risk case closed within 60 days. Once that's closed, is that kept? I mean, does somebody have that information if another case develops against that person or another, and then is it still active? I guess my question, even if it's closed.
Absolutely. It's still accessible and still there so that if another report comes in, you can do a search and that's a regular part of their process to see if there are additional searches. And that makes sense because sometimes because one case might be closed or one might be unsubstantiated, in the future, we may find that this is a pattern of practice and an assessment may actually end up becoming an investigation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, I'm just trying to see what pages are particularly useful here.
Can we go to this one with the ongoing family services caseload?
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, this page, it discusses ongoing family caseloads. And what happens is families that have been determined to be at high or very high risk of harm, that forms the basis of the ongoing family caseload. Children receiving services in DCF custody or children under court-ordered conditional custody, or children that are still in the custody of their parents, but under the family receiving family services, all these are called our ongoing cases. And the point in time data here from 2020 shows that there were 1,093 children in DCF custody, 435 children in conditional custody arrangements, and 348 families receiving ongoing support. So all of those children form the basis of the ongoing family services caseload.
So the downturn from 2018 to 2019, and then additionally to 2020, the 2019 to 2020 would seem to be COVID related, but there is a trend downward.
I agree. I agree.
Well, is it a real trend, or do you have any sense of what's causing that or related to that?
Some of it is COVID related, but we really won't be able to suss out that data until next year. But our sense is, looking at the way the numbers are trending, there is just more of a emphasis and effort to try to help families before they get into such trouble that they need to come to DCF to receive services. And I do believe that's why those numbers are going down.
Okay, and so what organizations would we attribute the support that's making that happen? Do we have a sense of that?
I have a sense that a lot of it is Linda Johnson's organization, honestly.
Okay. Terrific, thank you. That'll be something to look at, because it may really help going forward.
I agree with you. Okay, I'm just gonna do one more page, and that is, where is it here? Oops. Hold on. Just want to talk a little bit about our juvenile court data. It's one of the unique things about Vermont is that our child welfare and juvenile justice are both administered in the same department. Juvenile services make up roughly 10% of the FSD caseload. And the two main categories of juvenile cases are CHINS cases and delinquency cases. And on this chart, there's a lot of data, but what I really want to draw your attention to is the data regarding the youthful offenders. As you can see, there's been a significant jump in the number of youthful offender cases beginning in fiscal year 2019 and continuing into 2020. So we went from 33 to 504. And we do believe that increase is likely due to the change in legislation expanding youthful offender status to young adults up to age 21 when charged with an offense that could be adjudicated in criminal court. This change, although it has increased the numbers, the change in the legislation is really fully in accordance with the research, showing that for the majority of these youths, being charged and adjudicated in family court provides much better outcomes for the youth and also reduced costs, given the high rates of recidivism in this population when confined in the criminal justice system. So that I did find that interesting when you see such a huge jump, and I wanted to point that out to the committee and also provide the reasons why. Other than that, the last page is just an
Can I just comment on that?
Oh, sure.
Madam Chair?
I know that's in your wheelhouse for sure.
Yeah, it is. Well, not only is it, but there's tremendous confusion in the public, and I think even among legislators, about youthful offender, raise the age, etc. And I appreciate the explanation and the focus on that, but I don't think many people really understand the differences between all of that group. The youthful offender is supervised by DOC and DCF. So there is that joint custody type of arrangement. And I think it might be helpful for a future committee, either this committee or the Justice Oversight Committee, or both, to look at this raise the age, youthful offender, delinquent, etc., and the differences. I spent a considerable amount of time last week with a family who had been in a car accident that involved what is going to be a youthful offender, I'm sure, or perhaps an adult charge, but trying to explain the difference. And I think it's just very timely that we're bringing this up.
You know, it is very technical, and the difference, it's sort of nuanced. And during the overview presentation, I'll touch on it again about youthful offender. But one of the things that is easy to make the difference is when you see that the youthful offender, the charge has to be one that could have been brought in criminal court. And as you discussed, the notion that the supervision is split between DCF as well as DOC. Those are two things that help, you know, in my mind. And then the fact that for raise the age, it's in terms of older youth.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is really helpful. And I don't know, Senator Sears, I think it's going to be your advice here as to whether or not we take that up in this committee. We certainly need to understand the youthful offender in this committee. But the justice oversight will also need to look at raise the age. So having some, I think it doesn't hurt to have that distinction. And whether we bring it into this committee or justice oversight or both, we can talk about
just
that.
the difference between what is a delinquent youth, what is part of the raise the age, and what is part of youthful offender. Probably the distinctions between the three.
Good. And Deputy Commissioner, thank you for your information, because that is really, that's been very helpful with this.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? I know I sort of raced through that, but I just wanted to make sure I wasn't wasting time.
No, you're not wasting time at all. This is terrific. Questions Committee, is there anything that you would like to discuss further in this report? Obviously, there may be some things that we come back to. We're certainly going to want to hear what's going on with the Child Protection Hotline and the reports of abuse going forward. Any questions right now on the report as it is? Wow. That must have been an effective report. Thank you. No, it really was very helpful. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's good. So why don't you take your screen down take the report down, since we're probably not asking questions on it. Committee, I think, any other questions or comments? Well, we have Commissioner Radke here on the report, the Child Protection Report. Okay. All right. Well, surprise, surprise. We have gotten to 5 minutes ahead of our lunch time. So we will, I think, Peggy, we will go off